There's always a possibility of solving this case, but obviously that window is getting smaller and smaller as time passes. We have a $1 million award for anybody who provides information that helps to solve the case or that helps to recover the bodies of Jane, Anna and Graham, and we'd like nothing more than to pay out on that award.
It's very clear in my memory, and my two siblings, one of which has now passed away, we assume murdered. It was a really hot day. My father and his mates had all decided to take the day off, and Tony Munro and I and the other lads that we would go diving with were going to go down to the old Glenelg jetty site where we'd been finding coins and portholes and lead ballast and all sorts of things. Everything was planned. I'd been diving I was 12, I'd been diving for 3 years. I was a very experienced diver for my age. And they're all going to go off, but I was told that I had to stay home, I couldn't come. So I burst into tears, you know, I was pretty upset. My father came down and he gave me instructions that I had to stay in the garage and clean the whole garage. Didn't come out, didn't dare to. We were frightened of our father. You know, we were terrified of him. My sisters were told that they had to stay in their bedrooms and they weren't allowed to come out. And we were left home by ourselves. Our mother was at work. My father didn't have his car, didn't know where it was, so he was being picked up. So it would have been, I think, mid-afternoon. It's hard to say because I didn't have a watch. And my father turned up and he was all smiley and happy and euphoric, like on top of the world. He'd already spoken to Ruth. He'd already explained to her what a great job he'd done helping these kids out and giving them a £1 note and taking them to Wenzel's Bakery just off on the corner of Jetty Road, apparently because my sister told me. We used to talk to each other. I walked in from the back door, cut straight through to the front door, and Tony Munro's there bawling his eyes out. And he walked through the lounge room up to my father and he said something in his ear. And Max put his hands up to his ears, to his head, and he rocked backwards and forwards and he said, "Shit, shit, shit." He starts barking out instructions to Tony. He told him to load up his boat with his aqualung and all his skin diving gear. They were going to use it. And they left. They drove away. They were only gone a short time, so they didn't go very far. But when they came back, my father was as white as a ghost. I wanted to know what was going on because my father was in meltdown. I'd never seen him like that before in my life. And when I went out the front, ran out the front, Tony tried to grab me on the way through, but I broke past him. I ran out as my father slammed the boot down of his white car. His white Zephyr had turned up, the one that had been absent overnight. But the car was full of people. My sister had been instructed to brush the blood and sand out of the hair. The little boy had his penis severed, and my father had a surgical roll like a doctor's field kit, and he'd stitched the little boy's penis on back to front. There were policemen directing traffic at each end of Macklin Street, men in suits, and men in suits back in those days were detectives. So then Max turned to Tony and he said, "What's he doing standing here? What's he doing here? Send me down to Bruce's." Tony said, "Oh, Bruce is not there." So then Max said, "Oh, put him in your car and take him down to your place." So he opened up his car, which was parked in front of our neighbour's house, facing the right way, and I hopped in, and the seat was covered in blood, and the floor was covered in blood, and there was sand mixed up in it, and it had started to go brown. Because I was a kid, I thought, why has somebody smeared Vegemite all over the seat and the floor? But it wasn't, because I do go hunting and blood loses its oxygen level very quickly and it browns off. In that 2 weeks, I forgot everything. I forgot all about what had happened. That was the idea. And I just went fishing and hunting. I had a .22, I went shooting rabbits, and I ran traps and nets and all sorts of things. Had a ball.
Who saw the bodies in the car?
Ruth and Claire. Max, who involved his daughters in everything. This is my sister Claire at the time. That's a photograph of Claire, my older sister, taken at Stansbury after the Beaumonts were abducted and murdered. We suspect that the towel that she's holding belonged to the Beaumont children. And if you look in the corner underneath her left hand, there's the well site. Well, actually, it's under the right above the towel is where the well was. It was surrounded by boxthorn bushes. So at that stage, the well hadn't been filled in. It's actually a sinkhole. So that was taken probably within 1 to 2 weeks of the disappearance.
So you still think the bodies are out there?
Oh, the bodies are in that sinkhole. What happened when I arrived back from Loxton? My auntie put me on the bus and off I went, came back to Adelaide. I was given money for a taxi, called a taxi back to McLachlan Street. I was walking, I hopped out of the taxi and I started walking down the driveway to the back of the house, and Tony, I heard a door slam, and Tony raced up behind me, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're going to Stansbury." I thought, how odd. I hadn't even been given time to speak to my mother. And he drove at 100 miles an hour from Adelaide all the way to Stansbury, and on my grandfather's property. He owned a small property there at the time. I picked up my bag, my suitcase, and I walked down the track. My grandfather happened to be walking up from the gully, and he was red in the face and he was really upset. And he started telling me this story, which I now know is rubbish. And my grandfather's a really nice guy, but sometimes people cover up for their children. And he told me how his flock of sheep, 10 or 12 sheep, had all run down the old well and died, which is impossible. It was only 10 to 12 feet deep. And the first one would have hit the bottom and gone bah, and the others would have bounced off it. He told me how the smell was unbearable, and all of his sheep were in the well and they were rotten. Well, that couldn't happen. My father had actually taken the Beaumont children, apparently, according to my older sister, down to, we think, Myponga Reservoir, and he'd wrapped them up in sheets, tied them up and kept them underwater for about 10 days. Well, anyway, they'd finished up at Stansbury. They were in the bottom of this sinkhole, and my grandfather and his mate, the farmer next door, and that's where the sheep went, they went next door, they had organised a flatbed truck, had loaded up maybe 10 tonne of stones at least or more on this truck and reversed it down the hill, and then these elderly men had thrown all these rocks down the well and completely filled it up. Now, I liked that sinkhole because Martin Hamilton Smith, my first cousin, I'm a month older than Marty, he's just retired from politics. Marty and I used to look in that well every time we were over there for the sleepy lizards and anything that had fallen in. I mean, things walk along and they go whoops and they finish up in the bottom of the well, so we'd try to get them out. And you could only just crawl in. There was only one crawl space because it was surrounded in boxthorn bushes. So we'd have to crawl in and look. There's no way any sheep ran down it. They all lived there. So I went down to look at the well because I was really a bit upset that the well had disappeared, and it had disappeared, completely disappeared. You could not see any trace of this well. All the ground was the same. It was just like the rest of the gully. It had absolutely disappeared. Okay, well mate, that is the site, the well site. Oh. That's where it was. Oh. Here we have a 1959 aerial photograph. These photographs were taken in South Australia from 1949 onwards, that I'm aware of. That's as far back as I could go. And they're high resolution photos from aeroplanes, and there's a sweep of the McLachlan Street area taken in 59 here, and it shows our family house has been constructed. The driveway started, but in the middle of the block at the back you can see the old well site. Yeah, I was told half this belonged to me, that's why I built the shack. What a lie. While you're here, Dee, we'll just walk out on the jetty a little bit. We'll see from here, to walk along the beach and go around those points and come out to the water. We could still make it, but it'd be hard walking because the rock should be up right at the high water mark. You can see some recent activity, so there are people staying here. You can see here where there's the bedrock, undisturbed. The bulldozer cut a track down across this corner. And if you have a look at the ground, there's rocks that came off the paddock upstairs when the well was filled in. So I'm pretty much standing in the middle of the well right here. This is it, see? So my father bulldozed this track out and cut the gully up as much as possible to really disguise the location had anybody remembered. I'm the only person who remembered about the well, and so when we were walking down, he was looking down here and he said, I gave them what they wanted. Now I can live my life, my retirement in peace. Now what I think happened was that he'd informed his mates in SAPOL, his guards that he always talked about, where the Beaumont children were buried. But what he hadn't told them was that there are 3 wards of state here as well. They are the wards of state that my sister Ruth had to admit to say that she threw off a cliff when she was a kid, but she didn't. She had a proper police interview. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that the Beaumont children are here. Now, if we were to dig this site, I would say we'd be met by armed resistance by SAPOL, preventing us from doing so. SAPOL didn't realise, his guards didn't realise they were being set up for a fall because, one, they wouldn't have known about the extra 3 children, plus when I was interviewed by SAPOL officers the day before Anthony Munro's sentencing, they asked me about metal containers that had been bitumised. They're worried about there'd be a time capsule left here. So Max planned on betraying his friends in state police. Look, I think we're going to have to move because I can hear people upstairs. That's about it. Let's go.